This is Critical Nonsense, our high-lowbrow show about culture, science, and tech. This week, special guest Payal Pereira joins Joey and me to talk about the history of sex in India and the culture of sexual repression. Heads up, in today's conversation, as I was just saying, we talk about sex. If that's not for you or anyone in earshot, maybe skip this episode and go back and listen to our last episode where Joey and I talk about dystopian futures of information control. You know, the lighter stuff. Okay, onto the show.
Goodbye, my love. This is what a Joey K. Meyer sounds like. That's me. It's Joey. That's what I sound like. That was a Dumb and Dumber reference because it's getting close to Valentine's Day. You know, on this show, obviously, I'm not the only person I could talk for a long time, but you probably want to hear from other people. Someone like executive producer and love guru, Jess Vander.
So weird. Hi, this is Jess.
And this week we also have a special guest, strategy witch and love aficionado, Payal Pereira.
Hello, hello.
This is what a Payal sounds like. Love aficionado. Unfortunately in these introductions, aficionado is one of those words that we wind me and Aaron both are just like, I can't think of a thing to say. Aficionado.
Or
it's
herder.
Apparently a fingerprint.
And a Valentine's herder.
Love herder. Do we have any housekeeping? Obviously, we've noticed those of you who have been giving us 5-star ratings. Thank you. You're angels. We see you. We don't actually see you because it's all anonymous, but we feel your actions. Go out, give it a rating. A Valentine's Day gift. We don't need chocolates. We do need chocolates. So if you're going to send chocolates too, that's great.
We also appreciate that.
Yeah. But if you want to prioritize the gifts that we're looking for, a rating and review on whatever platform you're listening on is always great. Helps us out. So we can spread more love like Saint Valentine or whoever. I don't know enough about the Valentine mythology.
Nor do I.
But I think that's all. As always, the show's also on YouTube for anyone you know, or if you are a person who has any hearing impairment, the closed captions are available there. And with that, I think we can kick off. Payal, we went through a lot of topics in our conversations and, down to the wire when you found out that this was going to be a Valentine's Day release episode, you came with the heat. So you want to introduce us to your topic this week?
Sure, Joey. Thanks. So when you were talking about sending us chocolates earlier, when you were asking the audience, I just want to mention that I have never been able to celebrate Valentine's Day back in my home country because if we were given chocolates or cards or flowers on Valentine's Day in school, like growing up in Catholic school, we were punished.
No.
So, yeah, just I deserve it. So, audience, whoever's listening, please, please, please send me chocolates.
I especially deserve it. I've been waiting this whole time.
Real quick, Payal, you mentioned your home country. Where, for the listeners, where are you originally from?
So I'm from India, the land of the Kama Sutra. And today I really want to kind of dig into why a country that is where the Kama Sutra originated is now a very sexually repressed country, is super conservative, and there's a lot to dig in. So
give us your background.
So India is a country which has a population of over 1.3 billion people, and yet people in India pretend like sex is a myth or don't talk about it as openly. And this was not always the case. Almost centuries ago, Vatsyayana wrote the Kama Sutra and really passed down all these great erotic.
For a little bit of context, what is the Kama Sutra?
So the Kama Sutra is a book that was written by this person named Vatsyayana. He collected all the information that ancestors from centuries and centuries before he lived had wanted to were passing down verbally, but it was never put into a book. And Vatsyayana decided to, make this concrete, make this something that everyone had access to, and decided to put it in a book. And that's Kama in the in Hinduism means desire, and sutra is like a thread that kind of brings everything together. So desire, love, and sex together kind of gives you a very wholesome way of living.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just really surprising that a country which had all these great that was so sexually liberated and had all these values has come to be the conservative India that we all know of today. Part of this has to do with colonization and how the British brought their conservative values, and these Victorian values were then imbibed into Indian culture and kind of changed the way that people view sex.
Mm-hmm.
So now that I've told you a little bit about the Kama Sutra, the foundations of sexuality that were in India, how do you think we as individuals can help a country like India decolonize these values and move towards a direction of sexual liberation?
Yeah, I think, first of all, it's interesting to hear about India's history, right? That, all of the things you brought up, I think are things sort of individually I knew about or know about in some varying capacity, but have not sort of thought about them together, right? Because I've never been to India, and I only, know people like you or friends that I have outside of work from India. I've never actually been. Hearing you sort of thread those concepts together is definitely giving me new understanding, but it's also interesting because it feels very familiar in a lot of ways to sort of the circumstance in the US, right? You mentioned you went to a Catholic school, right? I think, so whether through Protestantism or Catholicism, a lot of that sort of, villainization or tabooization, is that a word? Making taboo of sexuality is very much ingrained in the US and is coming from very similar sort of origins.
And it's also interesting to me how much easier that direction is, how much easier it feels to close off people culturally to something than to open up. That's why, when you're talking about the history pile, it's these, oral tradition passed down, now written, a whole thing then totally just clammed up, closed up. That's just what an interesting way we exist.
Yeah, I think, right, in all of these cases, it's about exertion of control, right, of a people, whether through religion or some other thing. I think, the key point of distinction is that there was not sort of, at least to my, certainly not in the US, and I think there are probably pockets in Italy, but there's not a rich history of sort of sexual wisdom and knowledge and sort of an embrace of eroticism in the way that the history of India had, right? This conversation that was happening for literally millennia before even the Kama Sutra was written, right? Like I did a quick search as you were sort of explaining the question. The Kama Sutra is potentially older than the Bible, right? As like as a comparative benchmark. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Right.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, it says, at least, in my quick search, it gives a 700-year range of when it could have been written, but it was like 400 BCE or 300 BC, like somewhere or CE rather. So it tells you like the history and the knowledge and the passing on of that wisdom goes back, multiple millennia. And for it to sort of so quickly and abruptly shut down is, I can imagine, like pretty radically jarring, right? Like your grandmother's experience in conversations of these things may be radically different than what your personal experience was.
Yeah, that's so true. And if you look at the way that these things were shut down, it was not shut down, it was probably ignored. And Indians, I guess, were so influenced by the British culture that it was more like we're accepting what you're saying. Like it did not feel like it should have changed if once the British left, but it didn't. It's because we started to imbibe it and use elements of these and change the way that people see religion. And it still continues to exist even today. Valentine's Day is almost a day of hate in India because there are these anti-Romeo squads
That's what they're called, anti-Romeo squads?
Yes, yeah, anti-Romeo squad.
Wild.
Yeah. And there are people that call themselves the love jihad that prevent people from, like if there's a Hindu and a Muslim, that's a couple, they, harass them. And there's so many other groups of people that just are there to stop people from celebrating Valentine's Day, which is why even if I was dating someone, I couldn't step out of the house or go on a date on Valentine's Day because you would automatically be targeted in some way. And it was not cool.
No, that really does not sound cool in the slightest. And also is, it is shocking in some ways compared to the New York City bubble, where I feel like from what you might see firsthand here, it's almost like the sexual liberation is cool and in, and almost like shedding any of the like cultural repressive tendrils is is like what one should do to get with the times. Meanwhile, I mean, even here there are it's far from it's far from the opposite, I think, in terms of like the mass perspective of culture writ large. And I guess like that's what's it's fascinating to see different stages of this process of maybe opening our minds back up and our comfort levels compared to like the most extreme opposite end of that spectrum.
Yeah, I think it's you brought up the point at the beginning, Jess, that it's so much easier to close something or to destroy something than to open it up. And I think, even in anecdotal conversations or reading articles or sort of watching social media and sort of where things tend to trend, you see that often, even if we have sort of, let's call it in the US, if we have more sexually liberated bubbles and less sexually liberated bubbles, because of sort of some of the geographic mobility that our generations have faced, right? Millennials, Gen Z are far more likely to move away from home in order to pursue work, education, whatever. Like you're still taking that culture that you grew up in with you to those new places. And so that intellectual capacity to say like, the attitudes around sex of my parents or a culture that I came from, even if I sort of intellectually disagree with them, the sort of weight and burden that can often still come with them in practice is, you see this a lot with, I've seen articles in the past where there's sort of a discussion of like sexually liberating yourself, but then still, slut shaming yourself as a woman only like to your, like in your own internal monologue. Like I'm interested in this person and like we're in sort of some consensual agreement of like what we're both looking for and then choosing to pursue some sort of sexual relationship, but then still sort of feeling that like weight of culture that you grew up in, right? Like culture is such a potent force that even if you don't agree with it intellectually or even sort of behave in a capacity that would sort of align with whatever culture you grew up in, the sort of emotional burden, right? Like that sort of transgenerational cultural trauma is going to come with you.
Yes, and it's sticky in a way. It's like, it reminds me of that phenomenon where if you're, I don't remember the name of it, but if you're talking about a myth and you're trying to debunk it, someone still may remember it as true in the process of you saying, here is this myth, but that's false. And then someone thinks like, oh, I did hear that somewhere along the way, like the thing, even though the whole point is saying like, but you don't need to feel that way, or you don't need to believe this. Like for some reason, there's like a sticking power sometimes to a thing, even when we should know that it need not be stuck to, which is, yeah. And I think that's why it's sort of like the undoing is so much, going back up the hill is so much more difficult than going back down. And that, right, that transition is slow going, it sounds like, in India.
Yeah, it definitely feels like people are like trying to be more sexually liberated, but privately. Like it's not happening. People are not talking about it. Like there are subcultures of adult breastfeeding happening in India. There are so many sex parties, but these are all like underground, and it's
I'm sorry, adult breastfeeding? We talked about that for a second. I've never heard of this. And at first I was like, breastfeeding is not a sexual thing, but are you suggesting there's something that I don't know?
It's called ABF for short. Just like BDSM, this is ABF. Yeah, and this is usually for men that want to feel like they're cared for, and this is mostly seen among that demographic of people.
It's interesting because some of the things that I've heard in the past, and like I'm remembering things I learned when I was in college around, I think like kinks are more likely to emerge in sexually repressed cultures. I'll do a quick search as we're continuing to talk, but it's interesting to think about that, right? Like the idea that you can't talk about things publicly and that you have to repress your sexuality tends to then sort of have it emerge. Like, is there sort of a grown, because I'm curious, like, there's a version of this, right, where, we're now multiple generations away from decolonization, and we're in sort of a digitally connected world. Like if you look to sort of the East Asia and Southeast Asia, because of colonization, India is much more integrated into like Western social media and Western media more broadly. And so I'm curious, like, are young cultures in India having these conversations in private, private meaning like you can be anonymous online? Like, is there a lot of digital conversation happening around this? And is there like a lot of sort of kink related subcultures that are emerging more so than potentially other places?
Yeah, that's a great observation. And I can tell you for a fact that because like Indian parents are so strict, Indian kids are the most rebellious. And I wouldn't say everyone, obviously, but this is kind of the nature of that, like families. And going back to your question about like, are there subcultures around this? I'm sure there are. I am not particularly familiar with most of them, but I would say in terms of conversations, there's an influencer who goes by Lisa Mangaldas is her name, and she puts out these polls every week about, would you like this position or that position? Like, what do you want to know about sex? And she gets so many responses on Instagram, all of them anonymous. But people are really wanting to learn about it, wanting to kind of have a conversation about it. But there's still definitely a sense of like, let's keep this anonymous. Yeah.
This also makes me think of how sort of reopening the conversation or trying to, shift people's perceptions and comfort levels. Maybe it's just as a brand strategist, but like I can't help but think about what sort of approach may be most successful. For instance, like in the United States, I think there is a substantial contingent of sexual health educators, and the angle, so to speak, of trying to talk more openly is in the context of, reproductive health, anatomical awareness, and like people just like having more scientific understanding of how they work and how it ties to their mental health, in that sort of like flavor of openness. And I wonder, Payal, if you have any, if there are any signs of like what might be the most successful types of, liberation niches, if you could call it that.
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind is doing things in a way that's coded, and this is an approach that Durex took. They branded condoms and called them jeans. So if someone went to a pharmacy, like most of our pharmacies aren't like Walgreens, we have to have contact with the person that's giving us the items. So
it's like over the counter.
Yeah.
Or behind the counter, rather.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you have this in stock?
Yeah. So it was embarrassing, and people were embarrassed to ask for condoms. So Durex called this brand of condoms and called it jeans. So
like pants?
Yeah. And the whole advertising campaign was mentioned nothing about a condom, but it was all about, this jeans fits so perfectly, just like using...
Make sure you wear jeans.
Yeah. Innuendo language. So that's like one hilarious kind of approach to get the conversation going, and things like that. But
it's interesting. I mean, coded language as an example is really interesting because it allows you to have a conversation more publicly.
Right.
And sort of exclude potentially people who you don't, right? That like children have been using coded language forever to hide things from their parents, right?
Yeah.
We see it and talk about it more now in sort of the era of the internet, but it's also, coded language is used as a way historically of, in gay and queer culture to be able to find people in very like subversive or repressive cultures, or it's used as a way to find in groups online of things that you're particularly interested in, not even sexually. So it is interesting as like potentially a stepping stone in being able to have, right? to sort of remove yourself from harassment or attacks, and be able to begin to have like a practice of like actually verbalizing the things that you're interested or talking about without, the fear of reprisal.
Yeah, and to me, it's both a safety feature and a search function.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, that's such a great way to think of it. Another example of coded like sex education is through dance. So India has like many forms of dance, and a lot of them have a way of like telling a story through certain actions. So I was reading earlier this morning about this man who goes and gives sex education through the form of dance. So like people find it hard to say the word sex. In fact, some states have banned people from saying the word sex even, or in like textbooks and things like that. So in a country like that where the saying it out loud is so hard, like you said, like coding is probably an interesting way to approach it.
Yeah, I mean, even like the term fuck comes from the when having sex was outlawed. It stands for fornication under consent of the king, right? Where you had to like actually get.
It's an acronym?
I did not know that.
Yeah.
I learned something today, years old, that I learned this.
It was like unlawful to have, carnal knowledge, right? So it was like, there's a couple different phrases that have like gone around: fornication under the consent of the king, forbidden use of carnal knowledge, or something like that. I'm like pulling up now just to make sure that this is
this real?
True.
Is this true?
I am. Oh, Snopes rates it false. Maybe it's not. Okay,
Scrub
great.
it all. It's all a lie. I was like, since when?
Well, that's sad. But let's pretend for the sake of this that it's true.
All of the lies we're spewing. See, and this is where all of a sudden now everyone's going to remember it as as it actually being an acronym, because that's more interesting.
What made me go back and like double check, fact check it, I was like, my dad taught me this when I was like 12. He's not like a learned man
Let's question
in
our
this
sources.
sort of capacity. So I'm like, let's double check this. I mean, but it is like a pervasive myth. Like it is.
Well,
I've heard it since then many times.
We will remember it this way. We will falsely remember. The F word is not an acronym. Well.
All right. Well, I mean, I think, it is interesting to see it breaking. And to your point, right? Like if it takes multiple generations to become repressed, it probably takes multiple generations to become unrepressed. But at least that there are sort of signs and hints that things are relaxing or opening up sounds positive. But it also is just such like a, reminder of the incredible like history and cultural like erasure that happened as a result of colonization, right? Like, I mean, imagine the things that India could provide to the world, a world that is in like desperate need of sort of sexual and erotic wisdom, because this sort of repression is pervasive in many, many places. I mean, it would be interesting to see like if India had been potentially sort of like the seat of historical sexual wisdom, like what is the replacement? And, wherever we sort of turn to is probably like a poor replacement in sort of its capacity to sort of have these sexual conversations. Like, I don't know who would be today, what culture we would consider like the most sexually liberated culture in the world.
Write that sci-fi novel.
Yeah, I I mean, it would have been a really interesting world to see India in that space where people kind of draw inspiration from Indian culture and give it credit, I guess. Yeah.
They're, according in just quick searching, the Cook Islands, Iceland, the Netherlands are coming up. As it just like I am not able to go deep into this, but
The algorithm
they're just
says.
like different cultures that are being referenced as among the most sexually liberated cultures in the world.
Oh, I thought when you were bringing this up of a culture, I imagined it as like an alternate universe where instead of India being the source of such origins, there would be like this other fantastical other culture that like teaches. It's like a first world country because they're just so unrepressed and free. I don't know. Interesting film rights. I give that to someone to do, but
Yeah. Well, Jess, I think this brings us to your wrap-up corner. The red light corner, maybe.
as long as the rules of getting over love are concerned, it may equally apply to getting over colonial repression, where it may take at least twice as long as it took to get to whatever point of openness and love in a relationship sense than it will be to get over any kind of hurdles or obstacles. And in this case, it sounds like India has a lot that it is working through from all you've shared, Payal, and it's really cool to hear your perspective. And also it just feels like something that our whole world is grappling with at different paces in our own time, I guess. The ebbs and flows of telling people what is okay and what's not okay. And weird new kinks appearing all through that process, many of which I am not aware of. And now I'm learning.
Free yourself. Free your mind.
The end.
Yeah.
Have sex or don't on Valentine's Day, but don't feel shame in whatever you do. Whatever you choose to do. Yeah. That's what we've learned.
And send me chocolates.
Critical Nonsense is a Sylvain production.
Brought to you by Uncomfortable Conversations. Have one with the person who you expect to be least comfortable with that talking about this thing. Okay, you go it.
As always, we'd like to thank our executive producer and perpetually uncomfortable conversationalist, Jess Vander.
Thanks. And of course, we must thank Payal Pereira for joining us as our special guest today. Thank you, Payal, for bringing us the topic. As well as our sound engineer and aficionado of love and beyond, Alex Contel.
We'd like to thank our programming coordinator and love or hater of dust, Les Jacobs. He's dealing with some allergies, but he's fighting it. Love wins.
And we'd like to thank our Valentine's production help, Zara Gilbert and Nora Mestrich.
As always, thank you, Sorry, Ellen. Special thanks.
Special thanks.
Not to the movie Love Guru with Mike Myers. You know, it wasn't good in any capacity. You know, it's just like...
Thanks for giving me the title then, Joey. Just unappreciated. Just, you know.
Yeah.
I'm a bad movie.
I think it had probably, we would look at it now as like having not seen it, but trying to remember, like deeply culturally appropriative. I think Mike Myers was playing like an Indian
guru about love that didn't know about
so
love
bad.
or something like that. Yeah.
Even
No,
worse.
thank you
I would
for
have
that
no
movie.
connection to this.
thank you to the Kama Sutra.
Yeah, I was gonna say thank you to Mindy Kaling for creating Sex Lives of College Girls. Finally, an Indian represented in a positive light in terms of sex.
Oh, I have heard good things about this show, but I have not seen.
Yeah, I've also heard things, but I don't know. Is it?
It's on HBO.
What the name describes? It's like Sex in the City in like a college type of situation.
Yeah.
So it's like Skins. We should also thank Skins because Skins was having, I think, Skins was a British drama about teenagers and love and sex and drugs and all of that. We should thank Sex Education again because that show is so fucking good. It basically is effectively literally sex education as the content is, which is, like the world needs it. If we can't have conversations about sex, maybe watching a show like that will make it a little bit more comfortable or like help us learn a little something in the process. It is incredible. You should watch it if you haven't.
I love it.
Just as like I'm not watching this show.
Well, I don't know. I'm open.
Gillian Anderson is incredible. She can do no wrong. A tour de force. And, thanks to love. Have a good Valentine's Day, everyone.
Yeah. And by the way, those chocolates that we were talking about.
Yeah, the chocolates I hope they're coming soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.